Hey there, and welcome to my latest landscape photography and wilderness adventure here in Tasmania. At the moment I'm down the east coast of Tasmania and I'm in a little seaside village known as Bicheno. Trying to capture this sunset on this really cold wintry afternoon down here at Bicheno. I have found this nice little spot here just by the side of the town, which is really nice this time of year, not having to walk too far or get too adventurous and too wet trying to find that ambitious photograph. I have set myself up on these little rocks here just looking for some detail. And as you can notice, the day is quite overcast and there's not a lot of colour temperature or colour cast at all. So I'm really going to focus on a slow shutter speed here to try and capture these details and these rock formations down here. These rocks would look very adventurous if I had a lot of surf coming up over them. But at the same time, if there was too much surf, then I wouldn't be this close to the water's edge either. I have put a 35mm lens on and I am focusing right down on this little trough where the water's spilling through here. I'm going to focus off into infinity and shoot straight into that beautiful golden sun as it is quite diffused by the clouds at the moment. I think maybe in another hour or so that sun will duck down below those clouds and add a nice burst of colour across this landscape, but there's also the inherent danger that that sun will overexpose what I'm doing. So at the moment I have put on a circular polarizer. I've stopped my camera down to ISO 64 and I have also put a 6-stop neutral density filter on just to really slow this shutter speed down. And at the moment I'm on f11 at 8 seconds, and the trick to this is to wait for a wave just to lap over the foreground here with these rocks that are covered in these beautiful little mussels at the moment, which is a nice contrast in itself with the black coloured mussels against the grey coloured rocks. And I have just taken an exposure, and even at 8 seconds I feel that I still need a little bit more exposure in this foreground. So I'm going to bump this up to 15 seconds. And there's my exposure at 15 seconds. And straight away, this foreground is looking much more alive against the nice contrasty background. I have been waiting here now patiently for about 30 minutes and there is some nice colour up over on the horizon there. It's nice and peachy, which I'll give you guys a look at in a moment. But what has grabbed my attention here at Bicheno for this sunset at the end of this day is the red fishing boat just moored off into the harbour here. And the thing that really strikes my attention is its dominant red colour against this very grey, dark background. What I'm doing is one single exposure, and I'm going to do this completely unfiltered. And the reason for that is I really can't afford to step this camera down too much in its slow shutter speed because that boat is actually moving, it's bobbing up and down. And I have worked out that the perfect exposure for this is about half a second. It is early morning here down on the east coast of Tasmania, and I'm just doing a bit of beach combing at the moment. I have decided to come out of town a little bit, from the town of Bicheno that is, and look for some compositions a bit further up the coast. And the reason for that is, at the moment in Bicheno there is absolutely no swell, and you can see the ocean behind me now, and the waves certainly aren't rolling in at this stage, which means all those big interesting rocks that could have made a fantastic foreground have got no waves crashing around them, so they just look a little bit plain without the water moving around them. So I have come to the beach hoping the surf is a little bit bigger, which it's not. So I'm just going to wait for this sun to come up a little bit and see if I can find an interesting composition. Maybe just across the flat of sand here, or just to the top of this little sandbar there is actually a lagoon, which might make an interesting composition with the rising sun in the background. Things are starting to liven up here a little bit on the beach. As you can see in the background, those clouds are getting some really nice colour in them. I have had to move myself a little bit further around this piece of driftwood, and I've also, as you can notice, put the camera into a portrait orientation, and the reason for that is to help isolate some of that sky, because I'm just looking at a whole bunch of blue up there and I just don't think it's going to make a powerful composition. I am going to try and lead the viewer in with this piece of driftwood all the way to the horizon, and what I'm hoping is the sun is going to peel just over the horizon there and just give me some glimpses of sun ray across this scene, lighting it up and giving it some contrast. So a little bit of guessing, a little bit of freezing. I'm actually quite cold here, so I'd say I'm about another 5 to 10 minutes away until true sun up, and hopefully I'll get some nice images. Stay tuned. I have managed to guess this to the point of it's almost a little bit funny that the sun has actually risen perfectly above my piece of driftwood as I wanted to, and the chances of that happening were quite low. I really didn't think I'd have the right orientation, but I am actually quite stoked with the results I've got. The sun has fully risen above the horizon there, and there was probably only a window of a minute where I could grab some good compositions before I got too much shadow across this log as the sun started to get some strength over the horizon. The exposures that I have done are at f16 at only a second. I have put a circular polarizer on as well, just to add a little bit of warmth to this composition, and I wish that warmth was applying to my hands as well, because I am freezing down here on the east coast of Tasmania, and it is true what they say, it is colder just as the sun is coming up, that last few minutes of the darkness. I'm going to sit here for probably another 10 minutes. As you can see, there is a ribbon of cloud just above the sun at the moment, and I'm just interested to see what that diffusion of the sun does to this setting here. The sun has been diffused by those clouds over on the horizon, and I thought it might change the composition a little bit, but what it's actually done is just flatten the colours right off, and it's also made the day very cold alongside that as well. So I have packed my gear up, and for now I'm going to head back into town, warm up for a bit and get a nice breakfast and a nice warm cup of coffee, and try and find myself another spot for this evening. It is the middle of the day down here down the east coast, and as you can see, it has turned out into a marvellous winter's day. At the moment, the sun is pretty bright in the sky, which means a lot of shadow and a lot of contrast and not a lot of photography opportunities for myself. So what I'm going to do is, while the sun's bright and I'm not in any particular hurry, is to try and find a suitable location for an evening shot here. I think as a photographer, sometimes if you're rushing around in the darkness like I was this morning, or you're unfamiliar with an area, then it pays to spend a bit of time, when you're not rushed of course, to suss out a location. So when it comes time for that sunset shot, you're not too rushed at all and you can spend all your time on the photography and not the place. There are a few different sort of compositions I'm looking for here. One is incorporating some big boulders in the foreground, which would look quite nice. I would really think they'd look good with a nice red sunset behind them. I'm also enjoying the look of these little troughs of water leading down into the ocean, and once again I would be relying wholly on a really good sunset. I just feel at the moment, with the lack of surf and lack of drama, it's going to be all about a high impact sky for this spot. And another position just up over the back here could also make a good photography spot also. So I'll just jump up a few of these rocks. There are also a couple of nice fishing vessels in this little harbour as well, which could also make a powerful subject, especially with the low rising sea at the moment, like I did last night, but always on the hunt for something different. The other spot that interests me, just looking around a few minutes ago, was just here. And what I really like about this spot, with a bit of elevation, is the lead-in lines, hopefully you can see that, in throughout these rocks here, and leading the viewer out into the ocean. Once again, the swell is quite low, so the drama is quite suppressed here as far as having a slow shutter speed and lots of movement from that slow shutter speed caused by the waves. And I think this will really need to be emphasised by a powerful sky reflecting across the ocean and in through these little water courses here to really make this scene come alive. So at this stage, fingers crossed, and I can't guarantee that of course, but let's stay tuned for this evening and see what the sunset brings. Sunset has arrived, and it's not quite what I had in mind for a sunset, but equally as beautiful just to be here. What I'm doing is something a little bit different. Instead of waiting here and trying to capture some motion blur and to try and get a really pinkish coloured sky to add some contrast to this scene, what I'm actually going to do is use the colour from these algae covered rocks as a lead-in line and a form of texture off into the horizon. Something I've done once or twice before when the overall scene is lacking the contrast from a moving ocean with white caps and a fast moving sky, which isn't the case today. What I'm doing is I'm just going to take one single image, and I'll just take a shot now. And what I'm capturing is a leading line through these rocks, through this gap, and you probably can't see this at the moment, but the light is just painting its way through to this big red algae covered rock in the distance, which goes off into the horizon. I think it's worked quite well. It's something that's a little bit different. I think as a photographer, if you just have in your mind's eye a typical scene that you gravitate towards all the time, then I think it's quite easy to be disappointed. So this has certainly forced me to think outside the square a little bit and rely on other elements in a scene like texture and colour to try and add a dynamic flow to this image. I will hang around here for a little bit longer and grab a few more images. The images I have been shooting are on 35mm and I've been shooting at f11 at only half a second.